Generally not being prepared, so thinking ahead and saying they may have done mock recalls and they may have done recall training, but actually thinking ahead to doing a proper simulation. So a lot of the little details that they miss out, like they might not have up-to-date contact details for their customers, they might not be able to access their recall documentation off-site. So little details like that. I have dealt with the regulators a lot over the time that I've been involved in doing recalls. And actually one thing I find is people tend to not want to talk to them, which is a mistake. You really should go and talk to the regulators and understand what they can do, because quite often they can help you, especially for a small business. Actually, it's really important. I think smaller businesses tend to get a bit concerned about talking to the regulators because they think they're going to end up in trouble. But oftentimes that's the best thing to do because it can save you getting into trouble. My take-home messages, I guess, from the years of experience I've had with being involved in recalls, helping companies manage them, is to be prepared and to actually think about what could go wrong in your supply chain and think about what you would do in order to address that before it happens. Another one is to be aware, I guess I call it a window to the world, so understanding what issues could happen and think about whether they could impact on your company so that you are prepared for them. A lot of the recalls that have happened in recent times have been things that, in 5 years ago we never would have thought that they could be a food safety issue, but they come up. So it's really important for companies to be across issues that are happening overseas and understand whether they could actually happen here. Another one is just making sure that you have all the information that you need before you make a decision about whether you're going to do a recall or not. I think a lot of companies sometimes jump to doing a recall too quickly, and that's not to say that by holding off, you're putting consumers at risk by any stretch, but it's really important to make sure you've got all the information, so you know where you know what the issue is, you know the potential for the impact that it's going to have, and you know where your products are, and you can talk to your customers about what they should be doing. So in a recall situation, a company would need access to a lot of different expertise. Communication is really important. So that could involve communication with consumers, making sure that they've got the right information to deal with the product safely. Communication with customers and other key stakeholders like regulators. The regulators are very important. So it's important to have an understanding of what the regulations are and make sure that you comply with those regulations and keep the regulators involved. There's a couple of different levels of regulation that you need to be aware of, both at state level and also at the Commonwealth level, dealing with Food Standards Australia and New Zealand. But also if you've got product that has either been exported or imported, then you'll be dealing with another level of regulation. So that's a level of expertise that a lot of companies may not put into practice very often. So they need to keep up to date with that, or alternatively look for external expertise. Expertise around the different types of risks that could be in food. For example, the level of allergen risk. Is the level of allergen a potential risk? What sort of, who in the population could be affected? If it's a microbiological issue, what's the nature of that? Who are the potential consumers that could be impacted? If it's a physical contamination, what are the potential implications of that? Also things like understanding the nature of it. So where could it have come from in your production area? If it's a physical contaminant, where could that have come from? If it's a chemical, where could it have come from? If it's an allergen, where might that have come from? So having the investigative skills to be able to do that is another skill. Also just being able to manage a team. So making sure that everybody knows what their role is and that they go off and do it, and then the team comes back together again and reports so that everybody's on the same page. I've quite often seen instances where everybody goes off and starts to do their allocated roles, but then it starts to get a bit muddled as to who's doing what. And so it's really important for somebody to be appointed as the recall coordinator. And that person doesn't have to be the technical manager in the business, but it does need to be someone who's capable of actually leading the team, making sure that people stay on track and actually making decisions and reporting back to the senior management. So it's really important if companies want to be prepared for a real product recall that they do practice. And so doing mock recalls regularly, at least every 6 months, is a really good idea. But the important thing is to treat it very seriously and treat it like it is a recall. Some companies will do a paper exercise so that they can actually prove that they can trace the product, but they won't actually go to other lengths of making sure that they can track back in the supply chain, maybe to see if they can track back where the ingredient came from, that they make sure they involve the whole recall team or the whole management team. So it is really, really important to treat a mock recall as an actual recall, apart from actually going outside and contacting stakeholders and customers, obviously. Yes, it is important, and it's very important to practice.